It's a Star Wars show, and I'm your host, Jon Justice. Glad you are with another episode this week. As always, you can email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or if you're enjoying the show on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe there. On this week's episode, new Rebels Rewatch podcast. I will rewatch podcast. Fans voice their least favorite special edition changes. We'll go all the way back to 1981 and proof that the negativity in the fandom has always been there. It's just now it's amplified because of modern technology and social media. Plus, we'll get to your emails this week as well. There's some really interesting rumors going around right now. Let's start off here, and then we'll dive into, because this actually relates to this brand new Rebels Rewatch podcast.
The hyperdrive is leaking.
Several different Star Wars commentators have been talking about these recent rumors regarding the Mandalorian and Grogu film. We have Ahsoka Season 2, and then we have the Dave Filoni Mandoverse film, which would serve as the end point of all the stories that have been told so far within the Mandoverse. Now, there's been some speculation that Skeleton Crew could be included in that, although we do know that there are characters within Skeleton Crew, specifically some of the pirates that we have seen within the Mandalorian series, the first 3 seasons of that show. Of course, the book of Boba Fett and also Ahsoka included. And the rumors are swirling around, one, the actor who plays Ezra was caught in a kind of a weird hot mic moment talking about the future of what he's going to be doing within these projects. And of course, there's Ahsoka, the second season, which is more than likely going to revolve around getting Sabine and Ahsoka back from Peridea, although that could be part of the Dave Filoni culmination film as well. Also, talk of Ezra actually being in the Mandalorian and Grogu film, which I'm kind of hoping for. There's been some back and forth, some division on whether or not the Mandalorian and Grogu film is going to be sort of its own self-contained story, or whether or not this will also continue to further along the stories that have been told in Ahsoka and this final Dave Filoni film that, again, will bring all of these stories together. Now, none of these have been talked about, or the Dave Filoni film hasn't been talked about in quite a long time. And with Star Wars Celebration coming up in a matter of weeks, I'm hoping that we get some more clarification regarding that particular film. But the speculation and what the actor who plays Ezra had said was that he alluded to him sort of being the focus in that movie. And it really got me thinking that the state of the Star Wars franchise and the characters they have to work with, we've been talking so much about Daisy Ridley and Rey, of whom I'm a fan, and these post The Rise of Skywalker films that are being worked on, whether it is the Simon Kinberg trilogy, whether it is the Sean Levy film that they've been talking about. But you also have this established group of popular characters, really good actors, surrounding that Rebels crew. And when I heard this rumor from Star Wars Meg on YouTube about the focus being Ezra, I really, like, my eyes and ears kind of perked up and went, wow, this could be a really good opportunity, because Ezra could certainly sort of take over not Luke Skywalker in a one-to-one comparison, but that hero role in future stories that roll into the events that take place after what we saw in the sequel trilogy. Now, there will have to be some accounting for where those characters were. We know that Hera, and at least the Ghost, was in The Rise of Skywalker, because it makes an appearance at the end of that film. And there's, some speculation that it could be her and Kanan's son piloting it. I don't know what the life expectancy is for Hera's species, but it just got me thinking that when we go back and think of the original trilogy and that core group of characters of Han, Luke, Leia, Chewbacca, C-3PO, R2-D2, you have this really fantastic group that you could go and develop movies around. With your budding Jedi of Ezra, you even have the connections to the Jedi in this character of Sabine, the actress of whom I absolutely love playing that particular character. And, of course, Ahsoka, you've got Chopper. I'd love to be behind the scenes at Disney or Lucasfilm to know exactly if they plan on taking advantage of those particular characters. Zeb as well. We've seen a live-action version of Zeb. We saw that at the end of The Mandalorian Season 3. So it's something that gets me excited and hopeful for, that they actually go down that road because, again, I want to see my beloved Star Wars franchise thrive and survive. And here you have, beyond Daisy Ridley and her focus, the focus of her being potentially the future of the franchise as one of the most well-known characters, you have a fan base that loves this group of Rebels characters that I fully think they could take advantage of even further within live action.
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
Working off of an article from Gizmodo, earlier this week, news broke that 3 of the Rebels' main voice actors, Vanessa Marshall, who plays Hera, Tia Sircar, who played Sabine, and Taylor Gray, who played Ezra, the voice actor, have started a rewatch podcast called Pod of Rebellion. The Ghost Trio will break down each episode of Rebels with the help of host John Lee Brody. The show did start, and the first episode did drop on March 11th. You can get more information. Just head on over to iHeart. It's also available on Apple as well. The Gizmodo article goes on to say, this is fantastic news for Rebels fans, but we already have a few questions. Could Filoni appear at some point? What about Freddie Prinze Jr. as the voice of Kanan? And will Marshall, Sircar, and Gray bring the show on the road to Star Wars Celebration? Whatever the case, we'll anxiously await to see what the trio are able to reveal about their fantastic show. So I've listened to the first episode, and I have a very critical ear just because this kind of falls into my wheelhouse, not just via podcasting, which I obviously do, but just being a 29-year radio show veteran. And I tend to be incredibly picky and a bit of a snob when it comes to listening to podcasts. For example, The Office, one of my favorite sitcoms ever, and The Office Ladies Pod is a really enjoyable listen, but unfortunately, that both Jenna Fisher and, I can't remember the other woman's name, Ashley Kinsey, they've got a lot of just verbal crutches that they use, and there are times when I just can't listen to the podcast because of the crutches that they use, and it drives me nuts that nobody has gone and correct them. Specifically, both of these actresses have this habit of repeating what the other person says. So, like Ashley will say, I was so excited, so excited. I loved the food that day. It was great. It was great. It's one of those things that really grates on me. So when I listen to these podcasts, again, I tend to be a bit of a snob. So the beginning of the podcast, about the first 15 minutes, was really kind of rough. And it had me questioning of whether or not they really needed the host, John Lee Brody. Vanessa Marshall really carries the podcast along. But I can tell you, once you get about 20 minutes into it, the podcast really begins to go and find its footing. And I'm willing to give it a little bit of leeway, obviously, it being their first episode. But already they're providing some really fascinating insight into the creative process of Rebels, into the creative process of recording the voiceover work, but also, of course, the stories in and of themselves. And the host serves in his role of trying to keep things on track, but it really is the 3 voice actors and actors who play Hera, Sabine, and Ezra that make the podcast really hum. I mean, obviously, that's the point. And as a massive fan of Rebels. I'm really excited now for future episodes. So if you like Rebels, I would definitely go and check it out. I think Vanessa Marshall in and of itself can, she herself could actually be the host of this podcast and do a fantastic job. And it's really interesting because her character as Hera being a sort of space mom, and they address this in the podcast, it transcends into real life, and even how she handles herself in talking to the other two actors, Tia Sircar and Taylor Gray as well. So, again, started off a little bit rough, but I'm really enjoying it, and now just eager to go and do a rewatch of Rebels. They're clearly taking a cue from other popular podcasts, and the Office Lady podcast is probably the one that's the direct sort of line, where you listen to them break down the episodes, add commentary, and give you some of the background of how the episode was created, and it makes you want to go and immediately watch the episode of which they're covering in that moment in time. So, again, if you enjoy Rebels, I would definitely suggest going and checking out the Pod of Rebellion.
This is not going to go the way you think.
Comicbook.com put together a rather interesting article I wanted to share with you. Star Wars fans are debating the worst change to the original trilogy. And here they say that there is a clear winner. 3 decades after the release of the Star Wars Special Edition, fans are still discussing the worst changes to the original trilogy. Star Wars fans on Reddit have overwhelmingly identified Jedi Rocks, the musical number added to Return of the Jedi, as the most despised change made to the original trilogy in George Lucas's special editions, in a thread asking fans to name their favorite and least favorite CGI additions. The extended musical sequence in Jabba's palace has emerged as a clear loser, with fans expressing how the scene disrupted the film's pacing and tone. Released in 1997 to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the original film, the original trilogy special editions featured numerous digital enhancements, added scenes, and altered effects that significantly changed from the theatrical versions, and we've been talking about this in the past few episodes of the podcast, that the fans had known for decades. The fan discussion, which gained significant traction on the Star Wars subreddit, also highlighted several other controversial alterations. The Jedi Rocks musical number, which replaced the original Lopty Neck song performed by the Max Rebo Band, stands out as particularly reviled among fans. The extended sequence features computer-generated singers and dancers performing a lengthy, tonally jarring musical number that many fans feel entirely disrupts the flow of the film's Jabba's Palace sequence. So let me talk about this just briefly. I've never had an issue with the special editions, and I don't want to go over ground that I went back over on last week's podcast, and I absolutely respect what George Lucas was trying to accomplish. I do question why there weren't more changes done to Return of the Jedi, as I feel like that film could have used. I think The Empire Strikes Back probably needed the least amount of special edition changes, although the inclusion of the actual Emperor I thought was a brilliant move. And I don't know if that, I think the Emperor change actually came after the original special edition, if I'm not mistaken. Be that as it may, I was surprised that in Return of the Jedi that some of the more wonkier scenes, especially some of the matte paintings towards the end inside of the Mon Calamari ship, just don't work. I've mentioned before the other scene before they head off to the Death Star 2, where Lando has a brief conversation with Han about the Millennium Falcon. Han walks away, and then Lando walks sort of out of frame. The matte and the compositing of Lando Calrissian on the set, along with the matte painting, is just absolutely atrocious. And I don't understand why they didn't go and make those changes when they did the special editions. Be that as it may, while I don't have a problem with the majority of the special edition changes, I do absolutely agree with Jedi rocks. I felt it was way too over the top, much like many fans. Usually it's something that I just kind of skip over when I watch the Jabba's palace scene. It does disrupt the flow. I agree with that sentiment as well. The original Lopti neck served the purpose of having a band there, but it was subtle. It wasn't shoved right up in your face, and that's what the Jedi rocks did. And I understand. George Lucas made this for kids. It's, his creation. I get the motivation and the rationale of why he ended up doing that. But, again, I just feel of all the changes, that was the one that was the least necessary and most jarring. Another widely criticized addition was the Jabba the Hutt scene in A New Hope. Never bothered me, by the way. And I appreciate the fact that they've actually updated that CGI Jabba throughout different iterations. And the version that we have now is very much in line with the Jabba the Hutt that we've seen and the Hutts that we've seen, whether it is in the prequel trilogy, in the Phantom Menace, or whether what we've seen in the Book of Boba Fett, and now even in Skeleton Crew as well. Numerous commentators, though, pointed out how that undermines Jabba's menacing introduction in Return of the Jedi. One user on Reddit said it's the least favorite change overall since it largely just repeats information, often verbatim from the Greedo scene, and so it accomplishes nothing but slowing down the film. The awkward moment where Han walks behind Jabba and steps on his tail was singled out as particularly problematic. And listen, you could have lifted that out of the film, and I don't think that it would have hurt anything. That being said, I didn't personally ever have an issue with that, and I'm appreciative of the fact that they've updated Jabba the Hutt along the way. When it comes to changing the sense of Jabba the Hutt later in Return of the Jedi, I mean, we've all been exposed to these films so often. It's like there isn't an impact anymore for the vast majority of individuals who go and watch these films to have the subtleties like that be ruined because of the addition of a scene where we first get introduced to Jabba the Hutt. Some additions have been largely accepted or even praised, such as the enhanced battle of Yavin in A New Hope. I talked about that at length yesterday, still my favorite Star Wars battle. And the addition of the windows to Cloud City in The Empire Strikes Back, which better showcases Ralph McQuarrie's iconic designs. Yet the Reddit thread reveals some choices continue to frustrate fans nearly 3 decades after their introduction. Among the more subtle disruptive changes, fans pointed to altered dialogue and extended scenes that impact the emotional weight of key moments. One frequently mentioned example was the replacement of Darth Vader's terse "Bring me my shuttle" line from The Empire Strikes Back with a more verbose "Alert my Star Destroyer to prepare for my arrival." Similarly, the addition of Vader shouting "No" before throwing Emperor Palpatine down the shaft in Return of the Jedi was criticized for undermining what was considered a powerful silent moment of decision. And yet, the motivation for George Lucas adding that "no," I think, harkens back to the "no" that you hear once Anakin finally dons the Vader suit for the first time and discovers that Padme had been killed. So, as people famously, or as George Lucas famously said, and people often repeat, it's like poetry, it rhymes. And so I understand George Lucas's decision to add that "no." I do agree there is a bit of wonkiness to it, but it was wonky in Revenge of the Sith when he does the "no" at the end of the film as well. So, again, I tend to agree with some of these, but I was one that, like I said, never really had that big of a problem with the changes that were made to those original films. And again, my biggest surprise was always why they didn't go further when it comes to Return of the Jedi.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
A British fanzine called Against the Sith. I did a little research on this, and I guess it was a rather popular Star Wars fanzine attached to the original Star Wars: A New Hope that came out back in 1977. They wrote this letter on January 3rd of 1981. Dear readers, it has been decided by the editors to cease publication of Against the Sith and the other fan publications, ATS number 10, Star Journeys 11, Array of Hope, and Crude Matter will not be published. Enclosed with this announcement are all refunds, see below. So this is where you would pay a nominal fee to get this fanzine. And obviously it was printed. This is long before the internet was around. Over the past months, it has become increasingly clear to us that we cannot continue publishing a fanzine for a movie in which we find so little to recommend. They're talking about The Empire Strikes Back. We still stand by everything we felt in our first letter to fandom in May, but would word it differently now. Since then, we thought we could fool ourselves, try hard to accept the film, and put out 2 more issues, issues 8 and 9. But we realized we weren't having much fun. Not only has this film fractured individual fans' emotions, fandom is fractured. Judging from feedback on number 8 and 9, those issues, most people are confused and much less enthusiastic about The Empire Strikes Back than they were about Star Wars. The questionnaire sent back to us had such diverse answers on all the subjects listed that it proved to us that no one has a clear idea of what the film is really all about. At this point, judging from the contradictory statements from the film's creators, we're not sure they know what they're doing either. We know a lot of fans have accepted The Empire Strikes Back, but we wonder how much they really love it as they loved Star Wars. For us, The Empire Strikes Back left out the most important ingredient: love, from which an innocent sense of fun flowed. Without this, the film is appealed zero. It is not for us any great piece of literature, philosophy, or religion. The filmmakers took themselves too seriously, and the fandom isn't following suit. It happened in Star Trek, and when this happens, we split. We kept the zine going, mainly because of our readers' wishes. Most seemed to care more about Against the Sith and whether or not it was coming out than what its editors thought one way or the other about the sequel. We were highly flattered by this, believe us, but we just cannot go on with the project if we find the subject so lacking. To us, The Empire Strikes Back is a dead thing with no life. We're not the only fans, fan editors, or Star Wars enthusiasts who have jumped ship either. Several prominent zine editors have let us know that their misgivings, and at least 2 others have washed their hands of the sequel and the future of the Star Wars saga. Life is more than movies! ! I fear there are some fans who don't realize this. But all of you out there, I hope, will understand our move. We thank all our readers for their contributions, enthusiasm, and support of Against the Sith these past 2.5 years. It was fun while it lasted, while it could last. Now we seek new horizons, better horizons. Thank you one and all, friends, critics, and various beings. May God, the one true force, guide you. Go in peace. P.S. Thanks for all the Christmas cards and cheer. Happy New Year and new beginnings. Nancy and Tracy Duncan. Now, again, this was a rather, I did a little bit of background on this, and this was a rather popular fanzine back in the day, and I just found it to be a fascinating read. I have not gone, and I would be curious to go and look at their review of The Empire Strikes Back, but it strikes me in the sense that it serves as a really good example just to show that human element and the divisions in the fandom, even back when The Empire Strikes Back came out, and that what we've experienced in the wake of the prequel trilogy and certainly the sequel trilogy is nothing new, apart from the amplification of these voices and the monetization attached to the negativity that we now see. And it's tough to find out who really is being genuine and who isn't, relating to the commentary around the plethora of Star Wars content now available. Stripping all that out, looking at just the fandom and how divisions were always there, on its face, it's really interesting that people had such a hard time with The Empire Strikes Back. I remember as a kid, because I was still very young, having seen only A New Hope when I was 5, so I was only going on 8 years old, I guess, when I saw The Empire Strikes Back, and just being thoroughly and utterly confused at the end of the film, ending on such a cliffhanger, and then having to wait 3 years to find out what happened with Han Solo. I certainly don't recall having any sort of negativity towards the film, but at that age, too, it's not like my mind was developed to a point where I could give it any critical thought beyond, hey, I saw these amazing snow speeders, this cool little green guy, Boba Fett, walkers, all of it. To an 8-year-old, it was just like, it's like candy. Give me more of that, regardless of the storytelling aspect of it. I will say, though, the seriousness of the film, certainly helped to mature my love of movies that I still carry with me to this day, of being challenged in watching a film that I don't quite understand, seeing that I was so young and it took on such darker themes. But I can also imagine that for some slightly older fans at the time who fell in love with the adventure of the original film and had an expectation that a part 2 was going to continue in that tradition, you're walking out of The Empire Strikes Back going like, I just got gut punched. We didn't get a conclusion. The bad guys won. That was really a risk for George Lucas during that period of time to go and do that. I think he was banking on, and he was right in doing so, the success of Star Wars, and knowing that he would be telling a third act, and the middle act is when the heroes do get beaten and everything, falls apart. But interesting insight into a core of the fandom that certainly didn't feel the same way that I did during that period of time and didn't like that film. A film now that is revered by many as being the best Star Wars film ever made.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, we'll start off with Blackie1948, who says this: I'm doing a third rewatch of Andor in preparation for Season 2. I'm eagerly awaiting the new season. I cannot wait. Watching the special look, it's obvious when Gilroy speaks about it that he was fully committed to delivering a well-executed and highly complex story. The Andor series is very dark. Each time I watched it, it's almost like the dark and disturbing elements of the show get amplified somehow. It's a scary show at times, especially during the interrogation scene where that creepy doctor is describing what Bix will experience when she's wearing the headphone torture device. I'm so grateful that Andor exists. Ever since I first became a Star Wars fan, I've always wanted a darker, more serious kind of Star Wars. It's better than what I hoped for. I cannot wait. Yeah, Tony Gilroy, of course, the promotion for Andor, which drops on April 22nd, is in full swing. Tony Gilroy has been talking quite extensively about Season 2. Some people have been asking whether or not Jyn Erso will appear in Season 2, and Tony Gilroy, to his credit, says, anything that happens in the film has to happen naturally. They're not spiking things in just to go and appease the fans and the fandom. So I doubt that we'll end up seeing Jyn Erso, and we might. But given that this takes place so close to the events and the introduction of Jyn in Rogue One, something tells me that they want to keep that introduction being as solid as it was in Rogue One intact. So I'm very much looking forward as well to Andor Season 2. I'm anticipating that I'll enjoy it more than Season 1. I'm also in my, third or fourth rewatch of Season 1, enjoying it more so this time around, although I'm reminded now that I get into the last handful of episodes. I personally just was not a fan of all of the prison sequences. Once Andor arrives at the prison, all of those moments inside the prison, they don't appeal to me until we get to the prison break portion of it. I find all of that just to be kind of drab and boring in terms of it's not its execution. The writing's great. That being said, that setting doesn't do anything for me. Everything else, no, thumbs up. And like I said before, I'm enjoying season 1 more so than I have in the past. Lastly, let's hear from Balex Jax, 8694, who writes this. I'm a fan of your EMBARK series. Bought all 7 books. Thank you. Is there a book 8 or a new trilogy in the works? Love your work, and listening to you in the morning. Obviously listens to my radio show as well, Tom. Thank you so much, Tom. So, listen, I really want to do a book 8, and I had actually started a book 8 in my series. I just have not been able to sit down and commit to finishing it, and I'd been toying with several different ideas for a story for book 8, and whether or not I wanted to take it in a different direction, focus on the main characters. I finally decided that I wanted to focus on the main characters and kind of round out the series, even though Book 7, Battle Planet, does sort of definitively end the story. I just felt like one story and making it a complete, 8-book series was something that I wanted to do. And I have a story in mind. And again, I had begun writing it, but I just haven't been able to sit down and commit to writing consistently and finishing it based off of all of my other commitments. But it is something that I would like to do, and I'd like to say I will eventually get to that at some point in time. But it means the world to me that you enjoy the series, and I greatly appreciate it. And again, if you haven't checked out my EMBARK series, I hope you'll take a moment and head on over to Amazon.com and look at the series for yourself. Right now, there are 7 books in all. Completes the entire story arc, and it's essentially 2 trilogies with books 1 through 3, and then 5, 6, and 7, with a book 4 that's a standalone, but is sequentially the 4th book in the series and connects the 2 trilogies. Book 1, the description is as follows. Deep inside D-Corp, the planet's largest civilian and military spacecraft factory, an industrial accident has set off a catastrophic chain of events. As D-Corp's ruthless leader attempts to exploit the chaos and seize control, the ragtag crew of the Anniversary discovers a mysterious device of unimaginable power. Now it may fall to a stargazer, a brilliant pilot, a battle-hardened soldier, a tech geek, and a ship whisperer to save Earth's evacuees from annihilation if they can survive the apocalypse first. Do not miss out on this fast, action-packed, and epic science fiction adventure without an agenda. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with sci-fi, written for adults, but also age-appropriate for those 11 and older. Pick up EMBARK Book 1 today. It's available in hardcover, paperback, audiobook, free on Kindle Unlimited, and also available in ebook form. If you like science fiction space opera, which you do, or you wouldn't be listening to this podcast, you like it to be epic, filled with really cool technology, a bit of romance, and a lot of unique action sequences, EMBARK is perfect for you. Again, head on over to Amazon.com and search for EMBARK, E-M-B-A-R-K, and Jon Justice, and pick up your preferred version in the series. That wraps up the show for this week. Love to hear from you. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment up on YouTube. I hope wherever you are, you're happy, you're healthy, you're safe. God bless. And I'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.